Before launching the bombing campaign at the end of 1972, the United States fell into serious misperceptions and a mindset of arrogance regarding its military power. American pilots were indoctrinated with the belief that the B-52 was an invulnerable flying fortress, operating at an altitude of around 10,000 meters, capable of simply dropping bombs and then withdrawing safely. The United States believed that its modern electronic jamming systems could completely neutralize Vietnam's SAM-2 missiles, while the Vietnamese Air Force, with its MiG aircraft, was deemed incapable of approaching and intercepting the B-52. This very complacency led the U.S. to believe it could subdue Vietnam within just 1 week, a premise that later paved the way for a heavy defeat. Following these misperceptions and initial arrogance, the United States launched Operation Linebacker 2, 18 to 30 of December 1972, also known as the Dien Bien Phu in the air, amid a deadlock in the Paris peace negotiations and a rising wave of anti-war protests within the United States itself. The objective of the campaign was to exert enormous military and psychological pressure, forcing Vietnam to accept the signing of an agreement under terms imposed by Washington. To achieve this, the U.S. employed B-52 bombers as a strategic instrument of destruction, harboring ambitions to turn Hanoi into a Hiroshima without nuclear weapons. The scale of the campaign was immense, involving more than 200 B-52 bombers and over 1,000 aircraft of various types, dropping tens of thousands of tons of bombs on Hanoi and Haiphong. At certain times, between 400 and 500 U.S. aircraft operated simultaneously over the skies of northern Vietnam, making Linebacker 2 the largest and most powerful air campaign in U.S. military history at that time. Continuing the unprecedented scale of Linebacker 2, the U.S. Air Force deployed an extremely sophisticated operational system, clearly demonstrating its technological superiority and command capabilities. B-52 bombers were pre-programmed with flight paths, moving along fixed corridors that had been carefully calculated in advance, minimizing errors during nighttime operations. Each B-52 entering northern Vietnam was shielded by a dense support force, including F-4 fighters tasked with escort and interception, F-105 aircraft specialized in suppressing radar and air defense positions, along with jamming, refueling, and reconnaissance aircraft operating simultaneously. The entire campaign was directed by a modern command system that enabled hundreds of jet aircraft to operate at the same time within a narrow airspace without collisions or loss of formation. However, this heavy reliance on preset plans and fixed flight routes exposed a strategic weakness. When real-world conditions changed, the U.S. Air Force lacked the necessary flexibility to adapt in time, creating opportunities for Vietnam's air defense forces to exploit and ultimately overcome the opponent's technological advantage. In contrast to the rigidity of U.S. air operations, the Vietnamese military and people demonstrated proactive, flexible, and highly creative preparation in the face of the air assault campaign at the end of 1972. Through intelligence and technical reconnaissance efforts, Vietnam was able to anticipate early the scale, timing, and main directions of the enemy's attacks, thereby proactively developing appropriate air defense plans. Vietnam continuously improved its radar systems, overcame the effects of electronic jamming, and enhanced the accuracy and combat effectiveness of SAM-2 missiles. Missile sites were carefully camouflaged and flexibly deployed, making them difficult for U.S. reconnaissance and strike aircraft to detect and destroy in advance. During combat operations, missile units consistently drew lessons immediately after each engagement, promptly adjusting tactics and coordination. Combat plans were rapidly modified to counter new enemy methods, while concentrating all firepower on the primary target, the B-52, the core striking force of the U.S. Air Force. This very proactiveness, intelligence, and creative military art generated decisive strength, contributing to the resounding victory in the skies over Hanoi. As a result of Vietnam's proactive preparation and flexible tactics, the U.S. Air Force quickly faced heavy losses and a severe psychological shock from the very first days of the campaign. On the very first night, the number of B-52 bombers shot down far exceeded all expectations of the U.S. command. This caused major turmoil among pilots who had believed the B-52 to be an invulnerable flying fortress, rapidly plunging their morale into confusion and fear. The peak of the defeat occurred on the night of 26th of December 1972, when Vietnam's air defense forces shot down as many as 6 B-52 bombers in a single night. Combat efficiency reached an exceptionally high level, with an average ratio of 5.2 SAM-2 missiles required to destroy one B-52, a figure that truly horrified U.S. military circles. These losses not only inflicted severe damage in terms of equipment and personnel, but also delivered a heavy blow to the prestige and confidence of the U.S. Strategic Air Force. Faced with this reality, the United States was forced to continually adjust its tactics, dispersing flight formations, changing altitudes, and diversifying attack directions to reduce losses. However, these measures failed to achieve the desired effectiveness. Ultimately, confronted with the risk of mounting losses and pressure on both military and political fronts, the United States was compelled to halt the bombing of northern Vietnam. This marked the first time in history that the B-52 had suffered such a crushing defeat, signifying a turning point failure for the U.S. Air Force. After sustaining heavy losses, even U.S. military officers and scholars were forced to reassess the causes of the Air Force's failure in Operation Linebacker II. One of the primary reasons acknowledged was the lack of surprise. Vietnam was not caught off guard by the air assault. On the contrary, it had predicted and prepared thoroughly in advance, rendering the U.S. advantage of a preemptive strike ineffective. In addition, the interval-based bombing waves inadvertently gave Vietnam's air defense forces time to reinforce their positions, draw lessons, and prepare more effective countermeasures for subsequent attacks. The flight paths and operational plans of the B-52 were overly rigid, pre-programmed, and did not allow pilots to adapt flexibly to real-time situations. Even when gaps appeared in the enemy's air defense system, B-52 bombers were still required to follow fixed corridors, losing opportunities to reduce losses. Moreover, natural conditions also contributed to diminishing U.S. operational effectiveness. Strong winds displaced electronic jamming bands, reducing the protective coverage for B-52 formations and simultaneously creating opportunities for Vietnamese radar systems and SAM-2 missiles to operate effectively. All these factors demonstrate that, despite possessing some of the world's most advanced military technology, the U.S. Air Force was unable to compensate for strategic and tactical miscalculations, leading to an inevitable failure in this campaign. The victory of Hanoi Dien Bien Phu in the air at the end of 1972 holds immense historical significance, not only for Vietnam, but also for the global wartime landscape of that era. It was the greatest and also the only defeat of the U.S. Strategic Air Force, as the B-52, a symbol of American military power, was for the first time decisively defeated. This victory delivered a knockout blow, both militarily and psychologically, to the administration of President Nixon, collapsing the strategy of using air power to force Vietnam into submission at the negotiating table. Confronted with this reality, the United States was compelled to return to the Paris Peace Conference, accept the signing of the agreement, and withdraw all its troops from Vietnam. At the same time, this resounding triumph marked a brilliant milestone in the history of the Vietnam People's Army, as the Air Defense Missile Forces became the first branch to be awarded the title of Hero of the People's Armed Forces in 1973. The victory was decisive, fundamentally altering the course of the war.